Welcome to the Treatment-Free Beekeeping Podcast, the only treatment-free beekeeping podcast on the internet. Used to be true, but it's not anymore. There's actually, Bruce Rodriguez has one, and there might be one or more other ones. But this is the one that's called the Treatment-Free Beekeeping Podcast. I'm Solomon. Today's episode, I have Josh Cleveland, and he is actually not a beekeeper yet. This is one of those few episodes where I talk to somebody who is going to be a beekeeper, but is not quite one yet. And I think these episodes are very important for new beekeepers especially, so that they can hear some of the questions answered that they have, but maybe we're too scared to ask. And I think it's also good for experienced beekeepers because it gives them an opportunity to hear what a new beekeeper sounds like in case they haven't heard one for a while. Anyway, we do encourage the enthusiasm, and I really enjoyed having Josh on here. He's a guy about my age. He's from up there in the Great White North of Minnesota and Wisconsin, and he is probably one of the best set up new beekeepers I've seen to catch swarms in his area, and I wish him all of the good fortune in the world. Here we go. Josh, thanks for setting aside some time and joining me today.
Absolutely.
Well, let's get started with who you are and what you do and all that good stuff.
Sure. Yeah, so I am a dad with 5 young kids, and I love doing projects and building stuff in the garage. And so when I have been doing different things like collecting pallets and having my kids cut them up and make pallet planters or different things, keep imagining, well, what could we do as my kids get older? And beekeeping is something that's always kind of been, that'd be kind of neat to check out someday. And for my job, I'm a recruiter at a community college. I get a fair amount of time driving to different high schools. And so I enjoy listening to different podcasts. So I just plugged into the search bar beekeeping, and the Treatment-Free Beekeeping Podcast popped up and seemed kind of interesting because I didn't realize you could keep bees without spraying a bunch of chemicals. And so it piqued my interest, started listening to some of the different episodes, and the thing that caught my attention was don't go out and get bees right away. Spend a year and really learn and read and listen to podcasts and find out if it's really what you want to do. And so that's what we've done. It's been about a year of a lot of research, and we've got about 15 swarm traps hung up around the community and some want ads on Craigslist. And so we're excited to see what this spring brings here in Minnesota.
So you don't have bees at all yet?
0 bees, which feels a little bit like, well, what if we don't catch any swarms? And we'll have built some hives and we'll have told everybody we were doing this bee adventure, and we'll just have a bunch of swarm traps. But it's actually been interesting reading different books. When you read some books, it seems so complicated and like it's this magic formula. And then when I read books like Keeping Bees with a Smile, or there's a website, Borrowed Vessels, Beekeeping, it just seems pretty straightforward. And I kind of like the idea of maybe never buying bees. We'll see.
Well, that would be the optimum.
It seems like it. I've talked with one person in our area. So I live up in northern Minnesota, about a half hour south of Duluth, so south of Lake Superior. And we can still find piles of snow on the north side of some of the big buildings where it's real shaded, or where people would clear their driveway and make a big pile. We've got dandelions, we've got some willow and some maple, but otherwise we're still wearing winter jackets at times and winter hats. So we still got our fingers crossed, and we're hopeful. Haven't seen any honeybees, but we've seen a lot of bumblebees flying around.
Yeah, a few years ago, I spoke at a conference in north central Wisconsin, which is, I assume, pretty similar climate.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it was right about this time of year, and there was snow on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And there was big chunks of ice washed up on the shores of the river. And yeah, it was pretty cold. That was an interesting year because I had speaking gigs 4 out of 5 weeks in May, if I remember correctly. And I ended up in Tulsa at the end of May, and it was pretty much full on summer there. And I had been all over the place.
Wow. Yeah, winter weather all the way to summer.
Yep. So tell me what you've done with your swarm traps.
Yeah, so there was an episode where I forget the name of the hive, but it had to do with like styrofoam, and that one caught my attention as like styrofoam is lightweight and it has pretty good insulating properties. And so when I saw on Craigslist pretty large styrofoam containers, coolers that had been used for shipping vegetables just one time, and these folks were moving and they were offering like 10 of them for free. I took our little garden utility trailer up to Duluth and loaded it down and kind of wondered, my wife looked at me and said, do we really need this many styrofoam coolers? It's like, well, we'll get them home. We'll see if we can make something out of them. And it actually worked out really well, just to take the little lip off the top edge, and then it fit perfect with the kind of a top bar style. So we've got the starter strip and the top bar. We didn't do the full frame because they're just a little bit shallow to accept a full frame, but you can get eight frames across. And then a friend of ours heard about this adventure of trying out bees, and he was like, I've been thinking about doing that as well. He said, but we've got 3 little kids, so I figured I'd wait till they're older. And he said, but if you're doing it, I guess I'm going to do it. And so we've got another young family that lives about 5 miles away from us, and he works with somebody that does some beekeeping, and so he got some brood comb. So we put brood comb on the starter strips, and we got up some of those lemongrass oil slow release tubes, and they're out hanging up on oak trees and pine trees and all over.
Well, I'll be honest, whenever someone actually does follow my advice and start out with just catching swarms, I'm kind of nervous that they won't succeed.
Yeah, it was tempting, especially when every couple of weeks the guy who's selling nukes up in our area, is kind of re-updating his posts and, these are good bees and they winter over. It's like, well, I could buy them. And it's like, that's $170. And it's not like I need a ton of them. If we even caught 1 or 2 or 3 swarms, it'd be a great way to start off. But I'm hopeful. This friend of mine, at one point about 5 years ago, was working for the power company, and he went to flag an electric pole, and he put his arms around, and all of a sudden he was like feeling all this movement, and he was basically had his hands around a swarm.
Ooh.
And so when I hear stories like that, I'm like, yeah, that's what I'm looking for, as opposed to getting bees from Georgia in April and needing to feed them a bunch of sugar water. And literally the day that I heard of some bees coming up to our area, it was 16 degrees that night. And I thought, man, if I was a bee, I wouldn't want to make that transition from probably 60, 70 degrees to 16. So.
For sure. Well, it sounds like you're getting into it deep enough. I think that's great. Got a good number of swarm traps out. You got feelers out. Hopefully you'll get some calls. I don't know when exactly swarm season is in your area, but don't get bummed out too soon. There will be swarms, and there will be swarms from those packages of nukes that other people bought. So, I'm guessing you'll get some of those other bees.
It seems like it. I've got a good feeling, I've got a minivan that I drive to work. I work 3 miles away from home. So if I needed to buzz home, it's easy enough. But in my van, I've got a paper box. I've got one of these swarm traps. I've got a 20-foot painter's pole, like an extension painting pole that collapses down. And then in one of the books that I read, it was a 5-gallon bucket, and you attach a painter's like rolling handle to it. And the thought behind it, and I'm not sure how it'll work, but I've tested it out, of course, just playing with it. If you've got a swarm that's hanging up in a tree 10, 15, 20 feet, you just use this painter's pole and the 5-gallon bucket and bring it up and kind of lightly knock it. And that way you eliminate the need for using a ladder or going up and actually cutting branches. So
yeah, you'd be surprised the number of times that I get. I'll be trying to promote people catching swarms to start out, and someone will say, "Well, I put out a swarm trap and I didn't catch anything, so I'm gonna buy bees because I can't rely on." And I'm going, if you go fishing, do you just cast the line in once and pull it out and go home because you didn't catch anything? I mean, where's the perseverance? But it sounds like you're about the best prepared as far as a first-time beekeeper that I've ever seen. I mean, usually a good effort is 5 traps.
Well, it's fun to dream big, right? You shoot high, and then if you don't hit that high mark, that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really like the idea of trying to model starting off with beekeeping without investing $500 or $1,000. So with the different swarm traps, like $0 invested into it. Literally, like even the frames, it's all pallet wood that my kids have. So I've got an 8-year-old, almost 7-year-old, 5-year-old. They're all pretty good with the hammer and pry bar. They'll take pallets apart. We got 2x4s, rip them down on the table saw. It just feels good to take something that was going to be trashed and give it a second life. So I've been dreaming about different hive designs, and the borrowed vessel is pretty cool. It's got like a 2-inch polystyrene pink foam for insulating properties, and I'm interested in that. But as I'm driving around, my brain is always kind of noodling on, well, what's something we haven't thought of? Because just because 75% of people do it one way doesn't mean that there's not 25% that just aren't talking about it. Or maybe there's something that hasn't been thought of. And one day I thought, well, what's insulated that people are throwing away? And I thought, well, how about a deep freezer? Have you ever heard of somebody keeping bees in a deep freezer?
Not on purpose.
Yeah, I wonder if that was actually like some of the generation of the thought was, hearing different, like I heard that bees will sometimes take residence in an old couch or like in an old abandoned car. And so the thought was like, well, a deep freeze, it's built to be insulated. So there again, when I saw on Craigslist a free deep freeze that was pretty small, it's like probably 3 feet long. And I went and picked it up and just used some 2x4 to create like the rest for the frames. And we've got that sitting out behind our garage, baited with lemongrass oil and filled up with frames. We used a hole saw to make 3 entrances, and then we'll see. It's basically a swarm trap, and if it works to winter over bees, it would sure be a cheap and easy waterproof hive pre-built,
Awesome. I mean, I'm impressed. You've got, I think, new people with the enthusiasm that you're coming into it with have a lot to offer the hobby of beekeeping. I mean, one of the examples I can think of is like the Flow Hive, which made millions and millions of dollars and sold many, many, many units. And that was created by somebody, as far as I know, didn't know a whole lot about beekeeping. So you're not wrong when you're thinking of these ideas of ways that you could do this. And I'm very much interested in any way that anybody can come up with to create and implement a beehive that hasn't been thought of before or is especially cheap. Because if you think about it, when beekeeping, throughout the history of beekeeping, the idea that you would go out and buy a hive is not really, I mean, that's a modern invention. Mm-hmm. I talk a lot about the Amazon Prime mindset. Throughout history, if you wanted to raise bees, you would go apprentice under a beekeeper, or, if you wanted to start by just attacking a tree and going for it and learn the hard way, sure, but most people are going to find a beekeeper who's already doing it. They're going to learn from it. They're going to create their hives with logs or with skeps, which are made of grass and dung, and there's just not a lot throughout history before the last 150 years or so where people would actually take money and go buy a beehive to become a beekeeper. Even in the early days of wooden box hives, I think most people are creating them themselves. The size of the Langstroth hive is based on, I believe, a wine box or something like that. So it's very interesting to me, and the beekeeping as a hobby, this will all evolve. Hopefully somebody comes up with something better than the Langstroth hive eventually, because it's a pretty decent hive, but it's primarily designed for modern migratory commercial beekeeping. And if you're not a modern migratory commercial beekeeper, maybe the Langstroth hive isn't the best option for you. Now, at the same time, it is universally available, and there are lots of gimmicks and gadgets specifically designed for it, and all the parts are easily available from numerous suppliers, so you have that. But it's not particularly well suited for home construction. Building the boxes are easy enough, but the frames can be kind of complex if you're not at least got some experience in woodworking.
From the books and the podcasts, definitely not a knock on the Langstroth, but the Layens hive just appealed to me. The idea of the horizontal, just only dealing with the weight of one frame at a time. I think it was Michael Bush was talking about, he wished somebody had told him, just go with all mediums, like skip the idea of deeps.
Yep.
And so I've got a question for you, and that is, what do you think I'll wish I had done differently? Or what do you think I'll wish is there something that would be nice to avoid, or something that would be really good to incorporate in this early season where there is a lot of enthusiasm, and sometimes the enthusiasm and the knowledge go hand in hand, but sometimes it seems like, getting on the right path allows that enthusiasm to continue on.
The weight is definitely a substantial issue. When I started out beekeeping, I was following D. Lesby's model using all deeps. And, at the time that was 17, 18 years ago. And she was then, I guess she would have been 50 or 60. I forget which decade. Anyway, and she was well known as someone who would toss around 1 or 2 deeps full of honey because she was a big beefy person. And, I as young people do, thought that I was healthy and strong and somewhat invincible. And I'm an outdoor person and I'm an active person. And so, I'm never out of shape. And, it's, if lifting a beehive is what it takes, then I'll just lift a couple of them and I'll be firmed right up and I'll be able to do that. And then I broke my back, and that all went downhill pretty quickly. But even before I broke my back, I realized that deeps full of honey are not fun to heft around. And I guess I would never have claimed to have been as strong as D. Lesby, and I'm, probably a good 4 inches shorter than she is. But she broke her hip also. And so she can't do that anymore either. And the weight, Michael Bush says you only get one spine, and the weight is a significant issue, especially if you are like I do and like to stack up my hives pretty tall. A medium full of honey is not as bad. But, you're talking about 60 to 65 pounds. And if you got a tall hive, I'm 5'8", 5'9". I'm pretty average, not tall. Lifting that much weight over my head and bringing it down to ground level is not awesome. But it's a whole lot more awesome than doing it with 90 pounds like a deep weighs.
Yes.
So the horizontal hive definitely appeals to me. The Layens hive definitely appeals to me. The last episode I published a few days ago was about Layens hive, and like I said I've wanted to do it for a long time, but I just have so much of my current equipment that just refuses to rot that it's going to be some time before I decide to mess around with a new hive style.
Yeah. Well, here's a hive design that I'm interested to see if you know anybody who's done it. The AZ hive, like where it opens up almost like an accordion. So you would actually like work out of a shed or even out of your garage if you had if you were willing to cut a hole in it.
So like built into a wall?
Exactly. Yep.
Let me look.
And so instead of lifting the hive frames up or vertical, you actually pull them out, almost like you were taking a book out of a bookshelf.
Slovenian hive.
Yes.
Yes, I'm familiar with those.
Okay.
I hadn't heard. I didn't recall hearing them being called AZ, but yeah, I'm familiar with the concept. Yeah.
It's fun to noodle around on different designs and just fun to research, a little bit here and there. Of course, I don't have any honey to use right now, but mead making, is that something that you've gotten into?
I have made one big batch of mead with a friend of mine who was a home brewer, and that's another thing that goes along with learning beekeeping from another beekeeper. If you're going to learn brewing, learn it from another brewer, because I've tried to do some experiments brewing cider and things, and they haven't turned out very well. But my my brewing buddy lives back in Arkansas, and so I'm haven't been back there in, what is it, 5 years now, 6 years now.
Sure.
But he and I did make this big 10-gallon batch of mead, and everybody loved it. I gave away a bunch. I drank a bit. Very nice, very good stuff. The key with that was it didn't really get good until it was about 3 or 4 years old.
Okay.
Is that so? You're interested in doing mead also?
I think it'd be fun to try. I've wanted to try dandelion wine, and so I actually stopped by our little winemaking shop here in Superior, Wisconsin, and picked up their little kit. You get some grape juice and your pectin pellets and whatever else. And he was a real nice 75-year-old guy, and he said he used to make wine with his dad when he was like 4 or 5, and it's been one of his passions his whole life. And so it's one of those, even if it doesn't turn out real great, kind of a fun memory to go out and pick a couple gallons of dandelion heads with my kids and just give it a try.
Another thing I think I would recommend is when you're learning beekeeping, you typically get the new beekeeper will set up a chair in front of their hive, their first hive, and they will just watch it for hours and hours. And that's don't get me wrong, that is really good. That's a great idea. You should do that for sure. But when you begin to work with your beehive, with the colony, don't use smoke as much as possible. And go barehanded if you can possibly stand it. And just take time and go slowly and listen to what the bees are doing, smell what the bees are doing, feel what the bees are doing. Learn that intuitive feel of a beehive that you can't read in a book. Because bees communicate in an entirely different way than we do. And, as they're animals, they're not humans. They don't communicate the same way we do. They communicate primarily through smell and a little bit through sound. And so you can really, and I struggle with trying to describe this because it's something that I can tell you about, but I can't tell you about it, I can tell you that there are things that you can sense in a beehive, but I can't tell you how exactly you can sense them. You get you get feelings based on the sound, especially, I think, is one of the easiest things for humans to pick up on, because we aren't particularly good with our noses like other animals are. So you can pick up on the sound a lot, and bees make a bunch of different sounds, and they can be loud and quiet and different frequencies of buzzing. And if someone doesn't tell you to actually slow down and pay attention to those things, you might never notice them.
That's really good. That makes me think of, it might seem unrelated, but for the last year and a half, I've been practicing and enjoying haiku poetry. And that the whole idea of haiku is you're in the present moment. Like it's a really short style of poetry, comes out of Japan. And here in America, it gets taught as this like simple syllable counting exercise. And so most people think it has to be 5, 7, 5. And it's actually more just that it's in the present moment, and it has a strong reference to nature and observing the seasons. So, in English language, if you say apple tree, that doesn't have a specific seasonal reference. But in Japan, it actually, just speaking of a maple tree or an apple tree, it speaks of different seasons. But here in English, we can get at the same heart by saying something like, the apple blossoms, or the blazing star, the bumblebee, throbbing against the blazing star. And so I'm with you, because being a guy that gets excited about life and kind of wants to drink out of a fire hose, it's like, man, let's go from this to that. A little bit like a bumblebee going from one blossom to another. It's been really cool to slow down and just appreciate actually where I'm at. And so thanks for that encouragement to, get into the hive and smell and hear and listen and even just observe, like, what am I sensing from the bees right now?
And there's a lot to hear and see and smell. And I'm not claiming to be an expert on it. I'm not claiming to be the bee whisperer or anything. But I do know it's a number of occasions. I don't even remember how many times I've gotten to a hive and I'll pull out a frame and I'll go, oh, this hive's queenless, without even seeing any visual evidence other than the way the bees are acting that it's queenless, or the sound. And I probably mentioned that too many times. But it's true.
Wow.
Do you have any poetry you can share?
Sure. So I got turned on to the haiku poetry. I was at a college fair sharing with high school students just that, your dreams are valid and keep your dreams out in front of you. And if our college is a good fit, great. And if there's other colleges, check them out. And another recruiter at one of the, different, some people would say a competitor, but I say we're all in this together because we're just serving the next generation. He shared that he was actually going to bicycle his whole route. So he was going to take like a 3-week bicycle trip and visit each high school along his path. And I was like, that's awesome. Because when I was in college, I took a 3-week bicycle trip from Minnesota out to Washington, D.C. and just loved it. And he said, yeah, I'm going to write one haiku per day. And I looked at him like, huh? It'd be a little bit like saying I'm going to watch one episode of Sesame Street every day. It was like, I don't get that, Kyle. And he was like, no, it's pretty cool. And so that struck a chord, and I went to the library and checked out a couple books, and I've really fallen in love with it. Here's an example. This one's by Cor Vandenheuvel. Check it out. Through the small holes in the mailbox, sunlight on a blue stamp. Through the small holes in the mailbox, sunlight on a blue stamp.
That really tells a whole story, doesn't it?
It really does. It really does. Or here's one that we will probably never experience in our life, but a generation back, when train travel would have been a little bit more common, and I know there's trains, but I don't think the seats swivel. At the end of the line, the conductor starts turning the seats around. At the end of the line, the conductor starts turning the seats around. And just noticing the things that would be so easy to overlook. And so as I get the chance to drive all over northern Minnesota, realizing even seeing a bag of trash fall out of an old rusty pickup, and then a month later as I'm driving by that same stretch and seeing a raven sitting on top of that bag and rise up from the ditch as I drive by, there's something really profound to appreciate, even though it's trash in the ditch, which I'd rather not have trash falling out of pickups. Writing a little haiku, and I say little just because it's short, but, taking time to pause and appreciate, it's made life so much richer. I've got one that I saw just the other day as I was inside just getting the first cup of coffee, and sunrise was just happening. And through our closed window, I heard the loon. And it was the first loon I'd heard, just that hoo, hoo. And so I walked out with a steaming cup of coffee and just said, so, sometimes you'll write out haiku, but sometimes you just kind of say it out. It was just, through the closed windows, the cry of the returning loon. Through the closed windows, the cry of the returning loon. And so that idea of, the returning loon gives us that seasonal reference. We know it's spring. And the fact that you really can't shut out nature. It even comes into our home through the closed window.
Really kind of non-dual also. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Well, your podcast has been an inspiration for me. So, I would not consider myself a haiku expert, but I really appreciate it. And so after listening to a lot of different episodes that you've done, one that really inspired me was your interview with your wife. And
really?
Yeah, so, I think you started off like, well, I've got a little, unusual guest. She's not a beekeeper. She's married to a beekeeper. And you just kind of went back and forth, well, what's it like to be married to a beekeeper? What's frustrating? If I recall, it was, when the kitchen turns into a honey processing area or something like that. Mm-hmm. It was cool to see that, a podcast doesn't have to be so stiff and formal. It can just be an expression of real life and our passions and what we're learning. And so after about 6 months, maybe 8 months of enjoying haiku and reading every book that I could check out from our local library and the surrounding ones, I thought, I'm going to start a podcast. And I don't know where it's going to go. It's been a lot of fun. And I've reached out to some different haiku poets, a lady up in Canada, Naomi Beth Walken, a gentleman over in Wales, Paul Chambers, some of my favorite poets, and they've responded back so graciously, emailing back some questions, and then I've read those around the campfire with my kids, and so it's been fun to involve my young kids and hear their thoughts about the poetry. And so just want to say thanks for the encouragement to just put it out there.
Well, thank you so much. I back in those early days when I was doing stuff like that, it was really looking for. Podcasting wasn't as sort of established as it is now, and the internet has done such a great job in the democratization of media and sort of the democratization of radio that podcasting is, the democratization of TV that YouTube and other video hosting services are. It allows people to share things that you would never happen, or you could never find, would never be interested in if they were just in text and pictures like websites used to be. Mm-hmm. I remember building websites with text and pictures. I still have one. If I could get the FTP set up, I could get back into it and get it fixed up and changed some more. But I've got more important things to do right now. But such is life.
Yeah.
So, and I absolutely love podcasts. I listen to several hours of podcast every day. You know, my various jobs either involve a lot of driving or a lot of, working outside alone or things like that. So I'm listening to podcasts almost constantly. And a lot of them are well done, like, you know, like a good TV show. There's writing and editing and processing and plots and reporting and, you know, all the various things that we've seen on TV and radio over the years. But now we have niche subjects like we've never seen before. You know, even me here on the Treatment Free Beekeeping podcast, you know, my audience is about 5,000 or 6,000 people if I'm doing really well. And, you know, it's sort of a niche of a niche of a niche. Mm-hmm. It's a small corner of a small hobby, you know. Mm-hmm. So I eventually when I started it, there weren't like the nice podcast hosting sites that there are now. And I was actually publishing it on my own FTP site and using my blog as the feed generator, and started it out that way. And I eventually moved it over to Podbean, which opened up my audience quite a bit. And they make things a whole lot easier with posting. I can just upload the file and add a description and a picture and get it going. And they would allow me to advertise if I wanted to do that also. But
I've appreciated that there's not advertisement. It's got a nice feel, kind of like you're pulling up a chair, you know, around the kitchen table and having some coffee with a friend, as opposed to, you know, watching a TV show.
Well, that's been part of the reason why I want to do it. Because when I started out doing it, it was always just doing it because I wanted to do it, not because I wanted to get rich or get famous or whatever else. It was doing it because I started it in Denver, and I was struggling because my bees were an hour away. And so anything that was involved with going to work on them was a huge endeavor, rather than what I had in Arkansas and what I have again now, where I can just, you know, if I want to go play with one hive right now, I can literally walk out in the backyard and do it. And I couldn't do that at the time. And so I needed that outlet to give some way to keep the beekeeping going during the week. And
that makes sense.
Yeah. So, and like I mentioned in the last episode, I had a little bit of struggle recently with it not being fun and with not wanting to do it anymore, not wanting to talk to people anymore. Mm-hmm. And now I'm jumping back into it, and I'm very happy with it, and back where I was 6 years ago, which I'm excited about, because I'm now, at no point during the course of this podcast have I been able to keep bees the way that I want to and the way that I did back when I lived in Arkansas. And now I can keep bees the way that I wanted to, and also do podcasting and do videos. And you know, I'm never going to be, if you're trying to take people through every step of every little thing, you're never going to be able to do enough. Mm-hmm. Right? You're never going to be able to teach every little step and get every little thing right. I'm not that person. I'm not interested in being that person. I just want to, you know, my favorite thing to do is a thing that I rarely get to do, which is, I'd probably get to do it more than everybody else, but go to conferences and hang out with beekeepers, friends that I have all over the country that I only get to see once every third year, or once or twice a year at best. And doing the podcast allows me to do that with not only with people that I know, and I have my friends on occasionally, and I get to meet a lot of new people as well. So I'm so glad that you've enjoyed it. You know, I'm one of those people, you know, people like Johnny Depp and what's his name? The guy who played Kylo Ren. They're the type of people that they make their art, they make their thing, in their case, movies, and then they cannot watch it. I have much difficulty listening to myself. I'm going to have to go back and edit this and fix it and get it prepared for publishing. And that's my least favorite part because I don't want to second guess why I said this thing or why I did that thing or whatever. I just want it to be a conversation, and you talk about being in the present, a conversation is that you're in the present. We're talking right now. It's going to end here in some time, and the enjoyment that we are having in this moment will pass, and we'll never be able to remember exactly what we did. You can go back and listen to this tomorrow, and you'll pick up things that you totally forgot about already. And it's in and out. It really is presence, and that's the thing that I enjoy about these conversations.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned community there of, going to these conferences and having friends all over. I got a question for you. I've got this long-term dream of someday hosting a honey tasting party and having like all the different unique flavors that like anybody could think of. Have you ever been to a honey tasting party, and what's it like?
Not specifically to a honey tasting party. I have known a number of beekeepers who collected honey from different locations. And so when visiting them, I'd get the opportunity to taste honey from all over. But I did have the opportunity a year ago at the Alternative Beekeepers Conference, and we had a mead. There was a bunch of different meads, and there were some other liquors and things all related to honey, and we had a little all the speakers after the conference had a little sort of tasting party, and that was pretty fun.
Cool. Yeah, I'm excited to get to experience some of that variety in different honeys. And here in Minnesota, we've got a lot of basswood and clover and just a lot of trees, right? And there was a friend of mine who shared some honey from Montana recently. And that had this like nutty, kind of dark, earthy flavor to it. And it was really fun to contrast it because I had never tasted anything like that. Awesome.
Yeah, we have our honey here is generally dominated by blackberry and maybe some star thistle. And I'll tell you this, the best honey that I personally have ever tasted is some honey that I got from Jacob Wissner up in Montana. He came down to D. Lesby's conference 2 years ago, and we carpooled. He was working in the almond orchards in Central California, and so we carpooled down to Arizona. And he gave me some honey in his what's it called? I forgot the name now. I have some right here. It is knapweed. And it is just like this pale tan color, and it is the most delicious honey that I've ever had. And I still have this full solidified jar sitting on my desk.
Cool. That's really neat.
Well, do you have any more questions?
Last question for you. What is your top couple beekeeping books? Maybe not how to. I'll just throw this out there. Just, going to the library and searching beekeeping has brought about like some really interesting ones, like a memoir by Meredith May called The Honey Bus. And it was really just like sharing about her life and a lot of challenge. Her parents split up and how honeybees actually were a big part of her actually having positive memories in her childhood. And her grandpa was a beekeeper. Or another one, it was an offshoot of like Sherlock Holmes, and it was The Keeper's Apprentice. It was super long. It was an audiobook. Got it for free from the library. And beekeeping was actually a really small part of the book story, but it did tie in. And so it could be like, how to. I've read like Michael Bush or, The Smiling Beekeeper, things like that. But it could be kind of something quirky too.
Well, I haven't actually read that many beekeeping books. And I have had people get upset at me for saying that I don't read beekeeping books and I don't follow another beekeeper. I'm not anyone's, I'm not anyone's disciple. I've been doing this for a long time. And so I sort of have the intention and the practice that the information that I'm communicating to you and to everyone listening will come from experience and will come from things that I've done. I don't just want to me, it's kind of disingenuous to read a book and parrot information and tell you things based on the book that I've never experienced. And certainly the bees will make liars out of us all the time. They like to do things differently. And, when I say all beekeeping is local, it's not just, cold versus hot. It's literally bees act different to different stimuli in different places, different weather conditions, different. It's all different. It's also all the same, but it's all different. But some books that I have read, because I started getting interested in beekeeping when I was back in middle school, I think. I think that's when I first had the wild hair to become a commercial beekeeper. My dad bought a nuke roundabout. I think I was in 6th grade or something. And back when people used to go to libraries, I went to the library, and it's great to hear that you also go to the library. I like to make sure my kids go also. Get lots of those free audiobooks they have now are awesome.
They are.
But there's a very old beekeeping article in National Geographic. It was one of the first things that I read on beekeeping. And I don't remember it. I think it's I don't remember the exact year, but it's like 1958 or something. It's pretty old. And there was another book about bees that was sort of like a children's novel that just sort of it didn't really have a plot line or a storyline or anything. It was just kind of talking about everything going on in the hive and all the different tasks that the workers do and the queen. And there was an attacking wax moth and something about a bear and a fire and all the good stuff. If you want to start out beekeeping and you want to get a good grasp of information and don't want to spend any money, definitely check out Michael Bush's website. But also realize that there's no substitute for hands-on experience. Yeah. It's a great idea to get down the basics and the biology of how things work, but there's nothing better than actually getting out there and doing it yourself. Another book that I read later on, The Complete Idiot's Guide to Beekeeping, is a sort of treatment-free beginner's guide to beekeeping. Cool. It's not too bad. What else have I read? I've read a couple of, what's his name? Jay something. His books, old books from Michael Bush's website. They're on there. You can read those about bee breeding. I recommend people get into bee breeding as early as possible and take all that energy that you would have spent on learning how to treat and learn how to do splitting and bee breeding instead. I think it's a much better use of your energy.
Makes a lot of sense and a lot more fun. I mean, it's
a lot more fun.
It's positive energy as opposed to like reactive. It's like trying to put out fires instead of, just enjoying the fact, keep the fire contained, sure, but enjoy its warmth as opposed to forever trying to put it out.
Think of how much enjoyment and activity that you have provided yourself with through making all these swarm traps and hopefully you'll make new relationships and meet new people, and I sincerely hope you get lots of bees, honestly. But,
Thank you.
But all that was a much better spent than had you spent your hard-earned money just buying everything.
I totally concur. That's why with our kids, we've got used bikes and we'll put on new tires and tubes. Not because it's easier, but because it's a great memory, and they're learning about taking care of a bicycle, and they're realizing that you can give something a second life. You don't have to throw everything away.
Absolutely. I'm totally into that. Everything that I have is used. I discovered that you can get free lawnmowers on Craigslist because people don't take care of their lawnmowers and they don't run, and so they just give them away. Or you can find them on the side of the road. And if you know a little bit about fixing up small engines, they're really easy to fix. You can have all the free lawnmowers you want. You can even resell them if you want.
Exactly. Yeah. And so just to encourage anybody who's thinking about doing beekeeping, and it might sound funny to be encouraging somebody when I don't even have bees, but when I look around my garage right now, I've got a couple swarm traps, I've got a couple hives that are in the process, and I've got a bunch of frames. Our garage is not this huge workshop. We just roll the table saw out into the yard and we'll cut up 2x4s for a half hour. And with 5 little kids running around, it's not like I'm devoting hours and hours to this. You know, it's a half hour here, it's an hour there. And it's been really fun doing it with my kids. They'll wake up early in the morning, 5:36, and even my 2-year-old will go, "Daddy, beehives? Garage beehives?" And so we'll come out and we'll just look at, you know, the beehives and talk about where the bees are going to live. And so I totally agree. It's been fun up to this point. It's going to be fun to see what it's like at the end of this summer.
Yeah, that's one of the overall lessons that I try to, I live in my daily life and I try to teach people and my kids as much as I can, and that's learn by doing. Mm-hmm. Learning by doing and making mistakes is the best way to learn. You will learn in ways that a book could never teach you, and certainly buying something and getting it in the mail will never teach you. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I get asked all the time, because I bought a rehab job for a house, and, you know, my wife's friends come to visit. How do you know how to do electrical? Well, I got a book, and then I just did it. Mm-hmm. How do you know how to do plumbing? Well, water flows downhill. You know?
Right. I mean, it's not rocket science.
There are, you know, codes and things that you have to abide by and good practices and things. But that's what you can get from the book. It's the hands-on stuff that you can learn that's really the good stuff.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Awesome. Well, I've had a blast talking with you, and thanks for your enthusiasm. And if you like, I've got one more haiku for you.
Absolutely.
All right. So this was this spring in April. There was still snow on the ground here in Minnesota. And cleaning out the birdhouse in the melting snow, a light blue feather. Cleaning out the birdhouse in the melting snow, a light blue feather.
See, that's another one that tells a whole story, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yep. You're brought back to the summer before, when there was a little wren living in there, and or a little bluebird. Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Well, thanks so much for staying up late and talking to me, and I hope I've been some help, and I would love to have you back on the podcast in a year or so and see how it worked for you.
That sounds great, Solomon. I hope you have a great season.
Thank you once again for enjoying another episode of the Treatment-Free Beekeeping Podcast along with me. I've been your host. I'm Solomon. If you want to get a hold of more beekeepers, if you want to communicate with more beekeepers, if you're a new beekeeper especially, we love new beekeepers. That's what we like to do around here. Like to teach people how to keep bees. Teach them to keep them so they don't get away. They're going to get honey and come back here. Sorry, that's an old Eddie Izzard joke, one of my favorite. I like my women like I like my coffee, covered in bees. Anyway, if you want to talk to more really weird people about bees, or normal people, there's normal people also. Check out the Facebook group, facebook.com. You can just search for Treatment-Free Beekeepers or groups Treatment-Free Beekeepers. That's where we are. You can also check out the forum, tfbforum.com. As always, you can find the YouTube page, Treatment-Free Beekeeping, and pretty much if you just type in my name, Solomon Parker, or Treatment-Free Beekeeping into the Google machine, you'll get a lot of the stuff, because I've been around for a while, and there's a lot of us now. So one day, our goal is to it's not going to be Treatment-Free Beekeeping anymore, it's just going to be beekeeping. And if you like the podcast, you like any of the stuff that we do, and you want to support it, You can do that at patreon.com/TFB. And then we have a couple of rewards set up in there. You can get like a free t-shirt and free stickers and patches and things. You want a nice TFB patch to go right on your bee suit there, you can get one. And that's all I got for today. So have fun keeping bees, because that's what we're here for, isn't it?